Many people think that they understand hydrogen. However, I don't think they do. So today we're going to be discussing 3 myths that I think are keeping us back from a green hydrogen future. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the High Level Podcast. My name is Jonathan. I am your host, a mechanical engineer, hoping to make the world a cooler, more sustainable place. In this podcast, we talk all things engineering and science. And today, like I said, we are talking hydrogen. We are talking about what it is, where it comes from, and what are the things hindering it from becoming the fuel of the future. Guys, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. And with that said, let's get into the video. So let's swing into myth number 1. And myth number 1 comes a lot from guys who are actually in the industry, who are sort of trying to push the hydrogen agenda. And myth number 1 is that because hydrogen can do everything that it should. Now, this might seem a bit confusing because if we look at hydrogen, hydrogen is a miracle fuel. It is the most abundant element in the universe, and it has a very, very high energy capacity, about 3 times that of gasoline. Now, the problem comes in when we try and fit hydrogen into this box. Because it is so energy dense, it should replace petrol or diesel or fuels or things like that. But the real question becomes, what's the best solution? So while I agree, hydrogen is an excellent fuel, it's an excellent decarbonizer, here's the story. So hydrogen is a chemical. It can be used in a whole bunch of things. It's used from fuel trucks to replacing coking coal in steel production, and it's even used a lot already in making the fertilizers that go on to help us grow more crops. Now, the real question becomes, because it can do so many things, should it really be doing so many things? So, rule of thumb, if you can electrify directly, let's look at straight electricity, and then let's see how we're making that electricity. Otherwise, hydrogen becomes a very interesting prospect in that equation. So this all comes back to an allocation of resources. How are we going to allocate the limited resources that we have to decarbonizing our world? And let's look at an example. So if I'm using X gigawatts now, let's say 100 gigawatts of power, and I want to decarbonize building heating. I'm going to throw up a graph for you guys just because you guys are visual learners. You'll see there, this is a graph that basically shows you if I'm going to electrify something or use hydrogen, what are the differences in reducing CO2 emissions? And you'll see that middle bar there is about building heating. So let's use that as an example. If I want to decarbonize building heating and I look at direct electrification and using maybe a renewable resource to do that, you'll see there I use about 2 kilowatt hours to reduce 1 kilogram of CO2 going into the atmosphere. Now, seems all right, right? If we look directly, so we say hydrogen is the be-all and end-all, that's going to take about 11 kilowatt hours to reduce building CO2 emissions by 1 kilogram. Obviously here, in this case, it makes sense. You can see the numbers in front of you, that it is easier and better for the environment if we just go direct electrification. So if I'm using 100 gigawatts on the building, I can save a substantial amount by just going direct electrification instead of going directly to hydrogen. Therefore, I think we need to take a step back as the industry, as guys who are excited about hydrogen, and I'm excited about hydrogen and the prospects that it has. We need to take a step back. Why are we doing this in the first place? Why are we even exploring hydrogen? Well, it's because we got posed with this question. It's the survival of the human species. We need to decarbonize. So if the goal is to decarbonize and we need to look at better ways of using our energy resources, we need to take a step back, like I said. We can't always use hydrogen for everything. There are some applications where hydrogen is the best option. Let's look at like steel production, for example, replacing coking coal. You can't do that electrically. And then hydrogen makes a lot of sense. Green hydrogen makes a lot of sense. But if we just use hydrogen and try and, like I said, stuff it into this box, and there's no way of letting hydrogen shine in where it's good, then we might be hampering our goals. Therefore, even though hydrogen can be used for all decarbonizing activities, maybe it shouldn't be. Now we roll into myth number 2, and this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing. It's the fact that we always say green hydrogen as the fuel of the future is just 20 years away. So this is actually borrowed from the battery industry, where the battery industry has constantly been saying, well, solid-state batteries are 20 years away. And hydrogen has always sort of been in reach, but also not in reach. So this is the myth that hydrogen, green hydrogen as a fuel of the future, is 20 years away. And in my opinion, this is sort of true, also sort of not true, depending on how you look at it. However, if you look at it, In 2024, in May of 2024, over 50 countries have published some sort of national hydrogen strategy where they either want to be the hydrogen producer of the world or they are going to use hydrogen in ways people have never thought of. But over 50 countries around the world have published some form of a hydrogen national strategy. Now, these strategies often include things like electrolyzer capacity. So for those that don't know, an electrolyzer is simply a device where you put in water, which is H2O, and you split that water electrically to create its constituents. So hydrogen, 2 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. And then that hydrogen, if you use a renewable energy source to split that water, that's what's known as green hydrogen. Now, these strategies have outlined that they want to reach 113 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030 and about 287 gigawatts by 2050. Now, these are averages. These aren't even the big predictions, which we'll get into a bit now. But a lot of the green hydrogen is going to hinge on a rather straightforward issue. It's not a very complex thing. The technology itself is there. The complex thing is, how many electrolyzers can we produce and how quickly? If we want to get to net zero by 2050, we are going to need to put in a whole bunch more electrolyzer capacity. So to give you guys an idea of how much electrolyzers we are producing per year, in 2022, we produced about 11 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity around the world internationally. So that's 11 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity, not installed capacity now. If we realize all the projects that are going on around the world, from national hydrogen strategies to private companies doing their own thing and wanting to push hydrogen, we could realistically, and this is very optimistic, see between 170 and 360 gigawatts of installed electrolyzer capacity. Now, this doesn't mean that people aren't using like a coal-powered electrification process to split water. This is just looking at electrolyzer capacity, which I think is a good thing overall. However, what's produced and what's installed are two different worlds apart. Let me walk you through some numbers here. In 2021, we had about 0.6 gigawatts of electrolyzers installed around the world and working, right? Next, 2022, we went up to 0.7, not a lot of growth. 2023, we doubled that. We went up to 1.4 gigawatts of installed electrolyzer capacity. And the estimates are that as we come to the end of 2024, we're going to have just over 5 gigawatts of installed electrolyzer capacity. Now, this is 2024. There's only 6 years left to get to that very, very handsome estimate of 170 to 360 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. And we sit at only 5 gigawatts. And this is where we get sort of a delta, a difference between what countries say, what countries want done, what the people want done, and what actually gets implemented. And maybe there's a few reasons for that. Maybe it's more complex to hook up a bunch of electrolyzers to the grid than we thought. Maybe it's not just about production. Maybe there's just not the political and financial will to do this. And possibly, and this is the one I suspect, green hydrogen is just not competitive enough in price, in demand, for it to make sense for private companies to go ahead and install these electrolyzers. So again, this creates this sort of what's happening in reality, what we want to happen, and that delta between the two. So you'll see this graph that I've put here. And this comes back to how many countries are putting out electrolyzer sort of goals, strategic objectives around hydrogen. And you'll see there in this graph, every single year, they make projections out to 20. This would be how many gigawatts are installed by 2030. And you'll see there all the way from 2019 up till 2023, every single year, we revise the estimates for how many gigawatts will be installed by 2030. We continue to increase the estimates. And I like the optimism. I love the optimism. But if we could only have installed 5 gigawatts around the world, how on earth are we going to install 565 gigawatts of electrolyzer supply in 6 years' time? In 6 years' time, this is what the estimates are as of 2022. And every year we get more and more optimistic. And this brings me to the crux of the argument. What's the moral of this story? Is hydrogen still only 20 years away, as I've said, sort of tongue-in-cheek? Well, not really. I mean, you could go right now, go onto Amazon, go onto Alibaba. You can buy a desktop PEM electrolyzer. You can buy one yourself and make hydrogen at your home. If you hook that up to a solar panel, you'll be making green hydrogen. So there's nothing wrong with the technology itself. It's more about how do we get this technology at scale. That is a little bit more tricky. And that's what I think keeps getting pushed out 20 years time, 20 years time, 20 years time. So again, I don't think we should stop being optimistic. Maybe we just need to mix that optimism with a bit of realism, a bit of political will in order to get this thing off the ground. Then guys, just a quick one. If you've listened this far into the video, I must say I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming here and spending this time with me. If you enjoy things around sustainability, engineering, we are always talking about these topics, so I would really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell so that you always get notified when we're releasing a new video. And guys, please comment if you would like to hear more about hydrogen, less about hydrogen, add it in the comments below. Let's start a discussion, because I think that's where we get value on this channel, is from the discussions that we have with each other in order to create a cooler, more sustainable world. With that being said, let's get into myth number 3. Now, myth number 3 is, it might be a bit of a controversial one, with South Africa being such a water scarce country. And this myth is going to be that hydrogen consumes too much water to be a feasible fuel solution, decarbonizing solution around the world. And this, I don't want to say it's not true, but it's a minuscule amount if you look at the bigger picture of things. But let's get into that. Producing hydrogen will require a lot of water. I'm not saying it won't require a lot of water, but it does. But in context, it's not a lot of water in the overall picture. The US National Clean Hydrogen Roadmap targets 50 million metric tons of clean hydrogen, of green hydrogen, produced annually by the year 2050. So that's 50 million metric tons of actual hydrogen produced. Now, if you look at it, it takes about 20 liters of water per kilogram of hydrogen that you produce. And this would mean if you want to produce 50 million metric tons of hydrogen, you are going to use about 1 trillion liters of water. Sounds like a lot, right? But for the United States, this is just 0.26% of their water supplies. If you look at it, their consumers use a whole bunch more water. So to dedicate this tiny little bit to decarbonizing other industries, and this doesn't even take into account that when you decarbonize or use a different fuel, you could reduce water usage in other processes, let's say like coking coal for steel or hydrogenation for vegetable oils, things like that. So that full study hasn't been done. So if we just use it as it is, 0.26% by the year 2050 of the US's water supply would be used to create that 50 million metric tons of clean hydrogen. Now let's bring it back to South Africa. Our green hydrogen roadmap targets about 7 million metric tons by the year 2050. And again, if we look at it at 20 liters per kilogram, that's about 140 million cubic meters of water. A lot of water, right? Not to say it's not. South Africans consume just under 20 billion cubic meters of water per year. So 140 million, 20 billion total consumption. If we put those numbers together, that's about 0.7% of our consumption per year. Now, in a water scarce country, I will concede that is a lot of water to give up for something that may be good, maybe not good, maybe support South Africans, maybe not. Fair enough. But if you look at it, we lose about 50% of our water supply coming from water service authorities. So guys like Rand Water, we lose about 50% of that water just from bad infrastructure management. So already, if you go ahead and let's say you can only improve that by 10%, you've already covered all the water that you would require to produce the target at 2050 in terms of hydrogen production. So it makes a lot of sense for us to do it, because hydrogen is not only going to decarbonize industries, it's going to create jobs in South Africa. It's going to scale up and create a whole value chain, a whole new industry that might support South Africa's GDP, support South Africa's people, and ultimately lift overall living standards. And I mean, we don't even only have to look at, okay, so if we just fix infrastructure, we can cover water. There are other options as well. I mean, we could just go straight to use treated wastewater, and it doesn't have to be treated to drinking level either. We can go ahead and maybe look at desalination plants, which can be used to supplement our current water supply as well as the hydrogen production conversation. So I think it's open to conversation. I don't think we should shut it down just because we are a water scarce country. And fair enough, I think this is an important topic that we need to talk about and understand between all stakeholders, especially the people on the ground who might feel disenfranchised because now we're using their water to produce hydrogen that most of it, let's be honest, we are going to export and make a whole bunch of money off of. And they might never see that money, which is the hard truth in South Africa. And here's my final parting word. So green hydrogen actually produces a lot of energy for the amount of water that you use. If you look at green hydrogen, like I said, we're using between 20 and 30 liters per kilogram of hydrogen produced. We use 20 to 30 liters of water. If you look at blue hydrogen, so this is hydrogen where you're taking hydrogen out of natural gas and used carbon capture with it, there you're using between 32 and 39 liters per kilogram of hydrogen produced. So already green hydrogen makes a lot of sense in terms of water usage when we're producing hydrogen anyway. Remember, hydrogen is a common industrial chemical. We use it, most of what we use it for is making fertilizers. We need to do that anyway. We might as well be using the one that is better for the environment. And if you put it into context, if we look at decarbonizing industries, and I won't say we're decarbonizing electric infrastructure with hydrogen, but hydrogen uses about half the amount of water that a nuclear or coal power station is using to produce the same and equivalent amount of energy. Therefore, I think let's have the conversation. I'm not saying I'm completely correct on this. I'm not saying I understand the picture fully. I'm saying we need to have the conversation. We need to decarbonize somehow. We believe green hydrogen is the way to do that. And we believe it won't put too much pressure on our water resources. But I think the conversation is there to have. We shouldn't just shut it down straight out the door. So does hydrogen use too much water? I'm going to say no. At 0.7% of South Africa's clean water supply, if we just fix up some infrastructure, we've already got water allocated for that. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of options as well. If we're not happy with that, let's go the desalination route. Let's build some solar farms and purify wastewater that way and use that water for producing hydrogen. And there you go, guys. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Again, there's your 3 myths. Because hydrogen can do it all, should it? Hydrogen uses a whole bunch of water? Does it really? And hydrogen is still 20 years away. Thank you guys so much for listening to the end of the video. I really, really appreciate you. Like I said before, hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. If you guys want to reach out to us, it's at High Level Podcast on YouTube and Instagram. And you can reach out to us via email as well. It's highlevelpodcast@gmail.com. If you guys are enjoying this, please check out some other videos on our channel, which I will drop in the end screen now. And I hope you guys have an awesome week further. Enjoy your December. This is me, Jonathan, from the High Level Podcast, signing off.